This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, we now bring you a discussion on government's recent measures to uphold media ethics. The participants are Dr. Pavan Duggal, cyber law expert, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR correspondent.
I'm joined by Dr. Pavan Duggal, who is an advocate with the Supreme Court and specializes in the field of cyber law, cybercrime law, cyber security law, and artificial intelligence law. And today we will discuss about the recent government measures to uphold media ethics, and this is in relation to the government notifying amendments to the Information Technology Act and fresh advisory warnings against advertisements on betting. Dr. Duggal, a warm welcome to you on the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you on your program.
Dr. Duggal, for the benefit of our listeners, could you tell us what media ethics is all about? We understand ethics to be about right and wrong, and how is it applicable to the industry of media?
We have been seeing that digital media has been growing in by phenomenal leaps and bounds in India, specifically during COVID-19 and beyond. But we are also seeing that there has been lack of appropriate clarity as to how the media, specifically digital media, has to deal with the digital content. The government had been seeing that there have been a number of cases where undesirable, unwarranted content was continuing to be published and transmitted by various media stakeholders. And that's why the need was felt that the time has come for minimal enablement and legal regulation of digital media. And for that particular purpose, under the Indian Information Technology Act 2000, the government on 25th of February 2021 actually implemented the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Media Storage Ethics Rules 2021. Now, these rules were very important because for the first time, these rules have laid down a code of digital ethics that needs to be followed by every digital stakeholder. In fact, these rules are applicable to all intermediaries, all social media intermediaries, and all significant social media intermediaries. And for the first time, not only the government actually came up with various common minimum denominators of accepted principles of what kind of content ought to be published, but more significantly, also put ball back in the court of the digital media stakeholders by looking for a self-regulatory approach. A very light-feathered approach was adopted by the government. Now, these rules came into effect from February 2021, but as these rules were continuing to being implemented, we saw various teething problems. Consequently, these rules got amended for the first time in October 2022, and now they have been updated as of 6th of April 2023. Now, the significant element in this entire new rules is that the government ultimately wants to protect the Indian users, the Indian citizens, from undesirable content, specifically fake news or false information. And that's the reason the government has now stipulated various mechanisms of a self-regulatory approach that needs to be followed by the digital media stakeholders. Of course, there's a digital media code ethics that's been put up that is expected to be followed. Of course, for that, there is some litigation that's pending before the Supreme Court. But as of date, Supreme Court has not yet stayed the operation of this particular digital ethics code per se. But now with these new updated rules that have come in with effect from 6th of April 2023, the decks have been cleared for a three-tiered regulatory approach. Number one, there will first be self-regulation by publishers of digital content or digital news content or digital platforms. If that level, the grievance is not sorted out, then the next level is again a self-regulatory approach by the self-regulating bodies or self-regulating organizations of the publishers. And subsequently, thereafter, the third level has been put up in the form of an oversight that needs to be given by the government. So, any perception that the government is going towards, shall I say, censorship or complete control on social media is completely off the mark. In fact, that's not what the rules have actually meant. The rules have actually sought to empower the digital publishers by making them responsible that they voluntarily adhere to certain minimum parameters of due diligence which have been stipulated under Rule 3 of these new IT rules. Now, these are basic information or basic principles which are expected out of publishers. For example, they should not upload, post, publish, transmit, share any information that is false or that's inaccurate or that's lascivious or to whom the rights do not belong to the person who's publishing the same, or which violates the copyrights and other intellectual property rights of other persons. So at the end of the day, it's basically just normal expected principles that the law expects you when you are actually going ahead and publishing content. But should you prefer not to comply with these rules, please be prepared to face two distinctive kind of legal consequences. Number one, the statutory exemption that's already granted to you as an intermediary, as a publisher under Section 79 of the Information Technology Act 2000, that's going to be taken away from you by operation of law. The second legal consequence will be that you should be prepared for being prosecuted for various offences under the Information Technology Act 2000 and also under the Indian Penal Code.
Dr. Duggal, we also find that the IT intermediary guidelines and the digital media ethics code rules of 2021, apart from what you have just recounted, is also focusing on online gaming and all the ad revenue that is being realized by these digital content providers. To what extent do you see online gaming as something that requires regulation within the society of India?
Online gaming is big time in India. But till now, we have found that this was a completely unregulated zone. So consequently, under the garb of online gaming, online gambling was rampant and people were being sucked into this online gambling rings and sets per se. So the government felt that the need has come that we should try to get more clarity on online gaming and online gambling. Therefore, they've sought to make some additional provisions under these IT rules 2021. At the very outset, I need to tell you that online gaming is a big ecosystem. And trying to redress that by a secondary legislation, while it may be a right step in the right direction, it's not going to be very effective because this is one ecosystem which will require a dedicated new legal framework, a dedicated law. But since a dedicated law is right now not coming, the government has come up with various provisions for online gaming ecosystem under these IT rules. Now further, the important thing is that the government realizes that online gaming is going to be huge in the future of the country and therefore they want to give a boost to legitimate online gaming activities. Therefore, all kinds of online gaming activities, including gaming activities done for money or with cash, are going to be permissible, except that the government is very clear on two things. Number one, there should be no online game that's going to deal in online gambling. Number two, wagering is going to be strictly prohibited and no stakeholder would be allowed to go ahead and offer for enjoyment of a performance any of the online games to their users which are in violation of the law. Another important feature that these new rules have specifically brought forward is the fact that these online gaming ecosystem stakeholders have been given an opportunity to self-regulate themselves. So rather than the government coming in, the government says, please free to have not just one but many of these self-regulating organizations by the online gaming industry. And responsibility has been put on these self-regulating organizations that they will examine each game that's going to be made available by each of the online gaming ecosystem stakeholder and will see whether the said game is a permissible game or not. If they designate the said game as a permissible game, then the said game can be allowed to be given to users and users can come and play it. But if they don't allow a particular game as permissible, then that game cannot be permitted. Of course, various parameters have been stipulated under the new rules of what and how they have to judge whether a particular game is going to be, permissible or not. But the government is very, very clear. They want to focus on ensuring that Indian citizens do not suffer any harm or injury, either to their bodies or to their health per se. And therefore, the entire issue that will be considered by these self-regulating organizations have also to be seen in the context as to whether the proposed games will cause any substantial harm to the users or whether that's going to be in violation of the prevailing principles of law per se.
Well, what we see from online gaming and gambling is the addictive nature of these two types of activities, which can hurt the average citizen if they are hooked onto it. And along with online gambling, there is also the sexually explicit content and the violent nature of the games themselves. Do you see that being a subject of regulation under this law?
Currently, this law is very, very limited and is only saying I'm going to permit every kind of a gaming, barring two things. Number one, there should be no online gambling. Number two, there should be no wagering. There should be no advertisement regarding the same. Now, the entire issue pertaining to sexual element or the content in online games is not being sought to be specifically addressed under these rules, though the self-regulating organization, which will be examining each game, will automatically have these important considerations as well to determine whether a game that contains sexual content or explicit sexual content needs to be made permissible game per se or not. Because clearly, let's understand it, under Section 67 of the Information Technology Act 2000, it is actually an offense when you publish, you transmit or cause to be published or transmitted in the electronic form, anything which is lascivious, which is obscene, or which is prurient, or the effect of which is to tend to deprave and corrupt the minds of those who are likely to see, read, and hear the same. So obviously, publication of electronic obscene content is already an offence under Section 67 and 67A and 67B of the IT Act. So clearly, the self-regulating organizations will have their task very well cut out. They'll have to make sure that any game that's coming up for their review must not contain content which is already an offence under the law. And if they're going to have some explicit sexual content as a part of these online games, then I'm sure that these self-regulating organizations are going to not make the sexual games as permissible games. So various checks and balances have been put in by the government at appropriate places. Look, the government does not really want to come in and over-regulate. The government says, I want minimum regulation. I want you guys as the online gaming ecosystem stakeholders to take stock of the situation. Please put your house in order, get your self-regulation in place. But should you fail to do self-regulation, the government has retained the power to come in and regulate you.
So on the one hand, you have the balance of the safety of gamers that includes children. On the other, you have startups who have online gaming apps being developed and targeting all age groups, especially children. So it's clearly a balancing act under the guidelines and the rules framed thereunder.
Clearly, the government is very clear. They want to go ahead and protect the Indian citizens. They don't want to go ahead and over-regulate. They want minimal enablement and regulation. And that's why the tremendous premium that the government has given on self-regulation is indeed very appreciable. In fact, it's a very impressive element of these new IT rules. We haven't yet seen this kind of a self-regulation thrust in the earlier rules and regulations under the IT Act earlier. So once you have the industry to self-regulate, I think the industry is going to take the chance with both the hands and is going to regulate on a self-regulating basis so that it can actually prevent or lock out any further over-regulation or subsequent regulation by the government. So on the one hand, there's protection of the interests of the consumers, the Indian citizens on the one hand,
right,
their pockets, their finances, as also their health. On the other hand, opportunity is also being given to these online stakeholders so that they can, on their own voluntary basis, comply with minimum parameters of law, of due diligence, which have been given under the IT rules, and to put their house in order by appropriate self-regulating mechanisms.
Dr. Duggal, you mentioned about fake news and how false information is being published, and that is sought to be regulated under the rules. MeitY is the notified agency which is fact-checking this false and misleading information in order to avoid and prevent fraud, especially related to employment or other opportunities targeting citizens. What do you understand about MeitY, and do tell us briefly about it for the benefit of our listeners.
MeitY is the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology in the Government of India. It's the nodal agency for everything to do with the digital format. Now, under these rules, MeitY has been made the responsible nodal agency for fact-checking, primarily because they are the only ministry of the government that's dealing with the digital format. While it's a good step in the right direction, I think it will be nice that apart from MeitY, other stakeholders could also be incorporated in the consultations on fact-checking in order to give that more balanced approach and impression to fact-checking unit of the government. The reason for this is, otherwise if it's only going to be governmental, such kind of an approach could potentially be criticized on the ground that this is nothing but a manifestation of governmental interference or governmental control. When I look at the entire rules, I nowhere find an approach of the government to go and over-regulate. So when the government has been so transparent and the government is encouraging every sector to come up with enabling self-regulation, if we can actually put in more balanced, shall I say, representations and representatives from various stakeholders into the fact-checking process of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, I think that's going to augur very well. That's going to go ahead and make our system not just very transparent, but also is going to actually lead up to a role model, which can then, as a role model, be adopted by other nations as we go forward to deal with the challenges of fake news and false information.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pavan Duggal, for being with us on All India Radio and discussing extensively on the recent government measures to uphold media ethics, especially in the digital age. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You were listening to a discussion on government's recent measures to uphold media ethics. The participants were Dr. Pavan Duggal, cyber law expert, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official.